The Starcatcher and the King. Look out your window tonight, and you'll see the moon. If you're lucky, you'll see the stars. The sky wasn't always like that, shining like a sheet of ice in the midnight sun. Once, long ago, it was dark. The moon was our only guide, and people walked into the darkness never to be seen again. It was a cold age, full of fear and loss. Many a person tried to change this, lighting fires that, in the end, turned to destruction instead of guidance, or harnessing arcane whisperings to lift the veil that covered the night sky. But even the strongest of mages couldn't hold off this endless tide forever. Darkness always swept back over the sky. And this darkness not only filled the world, but people's hearts. The night was another word for violence and fear, with guarded chests and darting eyes that harvest the black for any sign of attack. None were more guarded than those who had already lost someone to the darkness, and of these there was one, his name lost to the ages, who longed for a lighter heart than the night would afford him. From his isolated cabin at the edge of the world, he watched the sea and the sky blend into one, his back to the forest that had taken his heart. Sunlight brought a reprieve from the night's thoughts, but always, the sun dipped back beyond the horizon, leaving only its pale reflection in the shape of the moon. Every night, the man looked up at the moon, begging its light to spread to the eternal expanse of the sky. It was years into his nightly vigil when something changed. The moon shone brighter, seemed closer, and the darkness in the man's heart was filled with this halo of light. The light spread through every part of the man, and he stood from his place at the meeting of the sea and the sky, and stepped towards the forest, intent on bringing light into the core of darkness that he had lost so many to before. If he could only bring light to the darkest corners of the world, then no one would ever be as lonely as he had been. As the man walked deeper into the forest, the light in his heart glowed gently, and slowly began to move ahead of him, leaving his chest weightless, free of the heavy heart that usually inhabited it. With each moment, it moved further, weaving a glittering trail through brambles and thicket, and it started to sing, a perfectly pitched song in a language the man had never heard before. Like crystals and wind chimes, the song carried on the wind, leading the man when the light vanished from view. Every step made the journey easier, the song enchanting his feet to find the perfect spot within the ferns and moss, a dance of nature and light in perfect chiming harmony. Breathless from the dance, the man chased the light, blind to how the trees around him began to pull back, regarding his foolish flight with amused curiosity. "Look how he runs," they whispered, branches forming an arch above his head, without even a care as to where he's being taken. "Mind your words, little one, and do remember yourself." But the man paid no heed to their warnings, using the trees only as crutches in his pursuit of the song. The trees laughed, their ageless amusement turning into another melody to fill the hole left in the man's chest. And, as the song swelled to a brilliant crescendo, like a bubble fit to burst, the dense forest opened its path to the man, releasing him into a beautiful green clearing, all too bright for the obsidian sky above. In a jovial explosion of colour and melody, almost too much for the man to comprehend, the light around him formed into figures, dancing and capering to the tunes, swaying and changing partners in the dance as fluidly as a river. And past the ethereal dancers, a table of gnarled silver wood adorned with every fruit imaginable and then some. Now came the aroma, alien perfumes that drew the man's nose, made him turn his head to the head of the table, where a being greater than all those dancing and feasting sat. Of all the laughter in the glade, his was the most enchanting. A song in and of itself, with the most stunning dance to accompany it. His chin raised and a shining smile, all drawing attention to a flawless mahogany face. Every movement taken with calculated grace that only served to accentuate his beauty. This was a king, in full possession of all that surrounded him. That much the man could tell. As the man watched, breath caught in his throat. The imposing figure turned, agate brown eyes fixing instantly on the interloper. With the confidence of one who knows he will be obeyed, he swept a sure hand across his court, and the music quieted, like a blanket of snow had carpeted the vibrant clearing. Then, his smile never faltering, he reached out to the man. "You are far from home, wanderer." The dancers split as the king reached out, as if scared to be caught in his radiance. The king crooked one fine finger to the man. "May I have your name?" Now the man was many things, a wanderer, a hoper, a watcher, but he was not a fool. Much like the rest of the world, he had been warned of the tricks that kings of the forest relied on. Do not give your name, or they will possess you. Do not eat their foods, or you will never eat human food again. Do not trust a king that speaks with a song, or you will be tricked. "You may not have my name, but what may I call you?" spoke the man, each word carefully chosen, but still so strikingly discordant when surrounded by the melodic tones of this forest kingdom. "You may call me King, little one. Come, you must be tired. Rest here. Enjoy our feast." "I am not hungry, King, but I would love to rest my legs." "Of course. Sit by my side. Tell me how you found our modest kingdom." Compelled by the king's song, the man found himself stepping through the crowds of dancers, their light filling him with a curious sense of hope. He left his home, looking for brightness, and perhaps he had found its beginnings here. As he grew closer to the king, it became clear to him just how great the king was, compared to him and to his underlings. He towered above the sprites serving him, and even to the man, he was double the height. The man could not feel fear, though, not in the presence of such awe. The king's smile broadened as he leant down from his chair to greet the man, his waves of chestnut hair making a curtain that pooled onto the floor, where smaller sprites weaved all colours of wildflowers and moss into it. "Are you certain you won't eat?" "I couldn't, King," the man assured as he sat, craning his neck to regard the king. "I have worried myself to sickness far too much to eat, but everything looks fantastic, yourself included, of course." "Aren't you a charmer? Now, what has worried you so?" The king laughed, and with another gesture, the kingdom burst into life once more. The music struck up, and dancers returned to their intricate pattern. And, under all the songs, the man explained his journey, about the vigil he'd held at the edge of the world, and about the light entering his heart to lead him to the glade. With each word, his voice became less alien, until he was part of the living song in the wooded kingdom. He was not yet at one with it, but the harmonies enchanted the king, who listened with such rapt attention as his people had never seen. "So you search for a way to brighten that abyss, and your hunt led you to me?" "Yes, King, to you." "I hardly know why. My mastery is in the earth. I ask the trees to whistle, and the birds to sing, flowers bloom at my command, and the ground forms itself to become my bed. I did not ask the sky to glow, nor would it listen to me if I did. But you amuse me. Would you care for a favour?" "You'd try." "Yes. As I said, you amuse me. But I will need your help, little one. Do you give it?" Mind-addled by the forest's symphonies and drunk on the king's attention, the man's thoughts slipped for just a moment, but a moment was more than enough for everything to shift. "You have my aid, King." This time, the hush did not fall all at once, but, like the first few drops of a rainstorm, scattered pools of light fell quiet, and the dancers stumbled to a curious halt, all peering curiously at the man. "Very well, then. Your promise is a great gift. I shall treasure it. In return, as a symbol of our agreement, I shall give you an ancient name of this kingdom. For as long as you aid me, you will be known as the Starcatcher, and I will be your king." The Starcatcher could not protest. If he did, it would have been futile. The agreement was sealed, and his pact with the king was set. He would aid the king until the night sky was blessed with the light that the day always brought. He inclined his head, and cheers rang through the clearing. 2 dancers peeled from the performance and draped their light forms across the Starcatcher's silver seat, slender fingers pulling his hair out of its bun and beginning to weave flower buds through its tight curls. "Will you eat now, or rest? Your precious forms are so frail, and if you are to help me reform the heavens, you must stay well, Starcatcher." "Please, my king." The Starcatcher relaxed into the skilled hands of the dancers as he spoke, but forced his mind to stay sharp in the face of his bright, impossibly obscured future. If he was ever to return home, he would not let himself starve for the longing of the court's finest food. "I am not worthy of such decadence, but I abhor the idea of refusing such an offer. I will accept only the scraps, my king." "Very well, Starcatcher. Take what you will of the discarded and the rotting, then rest. When you wake, your tasks will begin." "And what will those tasks be, my king?" The dancers moved away, their silent task completed, and rejoined the complicated waltz as easily as breathing. The flowers in the Starcatcher's hair glowed softly, and a calm washed over him as the king, with his matching crown, leaned down to croon in his ear. "You will find me a light that never fades, Starcatcher, and you will find me silver wings to carry light up to the heavens you so desperately want to fill. When you have found them both, I will light the sky, and the path home will be open to you." With that, the king stood, the wind whispering in every movement of his powerful majesty. The Starcatcher could only stare in awe as he stepped from the feast, weaving easily across the court, as if he were the missing piece of the light's dance, and into an eloquent palanquin of twisted golden branches and icy mirrors. Alone in the court of the king, the Starcatcher found his way to the scraps, assured that if he could stomach this, then his return to the human world one day would be easier. Dark flies alighted from it, but even the worst of the food was as alluring as the voice of the king itself. But the king was right. He had to stay well. So the Starcatcher ate, first small tentative mouthfuls, and then a meal, a feast, but never the finest. And when his appetite was sated, a bed of moss and honeysuckle rose up to meet him. Lights and dancers floated before his weary eyes as sleep took him into the one darkness that he welcomed, comforted and hopeful for the future to come. When he next woke, sprites scattered from his sleeping form like dust in the wind. He opened his eyes to find himself bathed in sunlight like he'd never seen. It filtered through the verdant roof of the clearing to rouse each person in the kingdom gently, and now it was the Starcatcher's turn. His body lighter than he had ever felt it, he sat up from his green bed and stretched, only for the sight of his clothes to stun him. What had once been the garb of a normal man, thick and rough to protect him against the elements, had been somehow transformed in his sleep. Where tanned braces used to be, intricate weaves of ivy and jasmine now covered old scars and bruises. A leather jerkin had been replaced with a long flowing tunic of some shining material he couldn't put a name to. The slightest breeze sent ripples flowing through it like a stone into water. Sometime in the night, the flowers in his hair had budded and blossomed into all manner of soft and vivid yellows that now tumbled down his back. Less a crown, more a veil. "Now you're suited to the occasion, Starcatcher." The Starcatcher looked up from his unfamiliar dress to see the king peering down at him, a balanced smile on his face. Now he could compare. It was clear that his new appearance had been fashioned in the form of his king, who now extended a hand to him to help him from the bed. "It suits you, and now we match. How darling." "And what of my old clothes, my king?" the Starcatcher asked, accepting the hand and feeling his bare feet sink into the grass as he stood. "Not that I'm not honoured to be blessed with yours. Don't think on them. We couldn't abide such brutish fashions here. You will have them if you leave this place in your search." "Of course." The Starcatcher stood, reflecting on the task ahead of him. Silver wings, and an eternal light to be found if he was ever to light the sky. Why is it so quiet? He hardly even realized he was asking the question, but now he realized it. He took a moment to listen. And it was true. Nary a bird whistled, nor a single song carried across the breeze, save for the duet between him and his king. "The morning is not for symphonies, it is for work songs, those that carry my court on their daily business. You did not assume that the feasts are merely conjurations, did you? Everything has an origin. The music will start soon, as they rise. But you should be concerned with your own work for the moment. I hope to see the wings by sunfall, Starcatcher. After all, I will be spending the day searching for a way to put them into the sky. The king caressed the veil of flowers in the Starcatcher's hair, plucking one to examine closely as he continued, his song turning it into a bouquet of flowers, and then an entire wreath. If you can't find them, it worries me that you will fail in your second search. I will have to reconsider our deal. Then I'd best start my search, my king. With that, the Starcatcher excused himself, bowing deeply to his king before he set off into the clearing. Truly, this world was different in the light of the day. The dancers had faded to vague sunbeams that cast themselves on workers with clearer forms, heavy-set blacksmiths and farmers with sickles of gold. Were it not for the iridescent eyes and pointed ears, he might have mistaken the workers for people. That was not the case, though, and a strange fear welled in his stomach, the first such dark emotion since he'd stepped foot into this kingdom. How long had it been since he last spoke to another being? Before the king, he had been alone for so long, with only the moon and the sun to listen to his ramblings. Would his words fall on deaf ears? Would they laugh at him, in that melodious way that they had been laughing last night? The only way to know, little one, whispered the trees at his back, is to try. You aren't a fortune teller. We know. We've been watching. But if I cannot find the wings? You make your failure certain by staying idle. Look how the ground is already reclaiming you in your delay. See it winding up your legs to root you in place, as if you are one of us already. Keep moving if you do not wish to let your anxieties weigh you down, or else you will be joining the forest too soon to see the night sky changed by your own hand. Catching sight of the rose bushes pushing at his legs, the Starcatcher took a deep breath, inhaling the perfumes of the kingdom, and forced all of his energy into moving 1 foot forward, and then the next. A forced march into the kingdom. He had no idea where to start, but starting was more important than starting correctly. Heavy feet dragged themselves through the dewy grass, carrying the Starcatcher to the home of a blacksmith who barely lifted her head from the reddened metal she was hammering at as he approached. I know what you're after, and you'll find no wings here, Starcatcher. None that'll fly, anyhow. The Starcatcher stared at the smith, stunned to hear how easily her words fit to the song of her anvil. She made it look easy, lifting the hammer and letting it fall, like it weighed nothing at all. And yet, you make that hammer look light. The Starcatcher indicated her work, watching as she encouraged an incredible shape out of the metal. You'll find no wings here. Silver I have in spades, but even a master could not make it fly on its own. Try the farmer. Leave me be now, lest the sparks fly in your direction and burn you. Suddenly, all too aware of the sparks, the Starcatcher stepped back, watching as the smith hammered her perfect rhythm. Slam, spark, lift. Slam, spark, lift. And then... Fly! The Starcatcher blurted out, a hand reaching out to catch one of the sparks, leaping from the smith's work. You do make metal fly, smith! The smith raised her head, watching the spark in the Starcatcher's hand with a stare of equal parts confusion and surprise. That doesn't hurt you. Hurt? The Starcatcher watched as the spark danced across his open palm, leaving black trails as it went. It was pleasantly warm, but never painful. No, it doesn't. A smile curled across the smith's face as she laid down her hammer and picked up the spark curiously. Well now, that is interesting. The king doesn't grant such invulnerability to every mortal that stumbles into our kingdom. You're lucky, Starcatcher. Be on your way. I'll catch some silver sparks for you. And what shall you have in return, smith? I know how you work. I daren't alter what the king has deemed as worthy. No one here will. But do not offend us in any such a way again, I advise. The smith went back to her work, heavy head hung over her station as her song began again, now accompanied by the melodies of other workers rousing from their slumber. Among the harmonies and choruses, one voice echoed through the kingdom, a fine pitch calling the Starcatcher towards it. As he moved closer to the voice, it grew to a peak, then fell again, only to be joined by a gentle bell. The farmer moved through the field, their song drawing animals with impossible forms towards them. Names and words would never describe the creatures that perched on the farmer's form and gathered at their shoulder. Power and tenderness married in perfect unity. The Starcatcher stared for a while, enraptured by the song and its effects, but soon called out, "Farmer, I come looking for wings." "I know what you come looking for, Starcatcher. You will find no silver wings here." The farmer laid down their tools and moved towards the Starcatcher with curiosity in their large eyes. A silence full of nature's song stretched over the two for a moment, as the farmer regarded the Starcatcher's regalia. "Perhaps the king would make you some. He is certainly fond enough to craft the finest for you." Their eyes glittered with mirth. Then they turned back to their field, their voice echoing and dancing across the air until the creatures began to converge on them. "The king is generous," the Starcatcher conceded, watching the impossible animals move with certainty towards the farmer. "But he has tasked me with finding the wings myself, whilst he does his own work." "Ah, well, that's a promise for you. Almost as powerful as a name. So generous of you to share like that. I'd help you if I didn't need to wash the animals before the feast. They're gathering flies." The farmer reached down to one of the smaller creatures, plucking an insect from its dull, tangled fur and releasing it back to the sky. It buzzed directly towards the sun, where its wings caught the light before it dived into the depths of the forest, glinting and glittering as it flew. And that light. "Farmer, you said your herd was gathering flies." The Starcatcher watched as another fly alighted from the herd, glinting past the sun on its journey. "Yes, but I already told you. I do not have the time to be doing favors and collecting flies. Find your own, Starcatcher. Don't be lazy. But take this jar if you're looking to collect some." "I see. Well, farmer, your help is greatly appreciated. Enjoy the feast tonight." The Starcatcher and the farmer went their separate ways, and the Starcatcher couldn't help but let out a song of his own. With the smith promising him the silver sparks, he was already halfway through finding the first of the king's requests. All that was left was to find enough flies to fill the night sky. He walked through the clearing, trailing his hands across moss and dancing lightly through sunbeams as he considered his chances. Where could he find so many in such little time? Glancing up at the sky, he could see the sun already at its apex. Towards the court, the smell of cooking was beginning to hang in the air. Another night of eating only the scraps awaited the Starcatcher, and he anticipated it eagerly, though the freshest of food was so tempting. But the scraps, covered in flies. Seized with energy once more, the Starcatcher weaved through the throngs of workers and courtiers towards the scrap pile he'd feasted upon the previous night, and, to his delight, the pile was still there, feeding an innumerable swarm of flies. Even his approach, by no means stealthy, didn't scare them from their delicacies. He approached the insects, the jar given to him by the farmer open and prepared to swoop. In that moment, it was as if the entire clearing held its breath with him, even the songs pausing for a moment before he dove, sweeping the jar through the flies and capturing a hearty portion of them. With a shout of triumph, he clapped shut the lid and clutched it to his chest. "Delighting in the bugs, Starcatcher? I thought you were supposed to be busy." The Starcatcher looked up from his successful catch to see the king looking out of his palanquin, one thick eyebrow raised. "What is this strange dance you do?" Warmth flushed the Starcatcher's cheeks, and he glanced away from his king, a smile crossing his face. "It was a celebration, my king," he explained, the smile growing into a bashful grin as the king stepped from his palanquin, lifting the Starcatcher's head with a single finger. "I believe I found the first part of the sky's light." "The silver wings already? Why, you're ahead of schedule. It's not even time for starters." "If I may be so bold as to ask, my king, have you worked out how to get them into the sky?" The Starcatcher watched as the king sunk into the ferns near the mountain of discarded food, one hand extended in his direction. "Of course I have, Starcatcher. Come here. Tell me how you discovered the silver wings. Did you leave the clearing? You don't look as if you have, but your stories intrigue me." Accepting the king's request, the Starcatcher let himself rest at his side, safe in the knowledge that this was not a stillness of fear, but of peace, relaxing after the panic that urged his movements of the day. Around him, the work songs were beginning to blend into something more cohesive, the beginnings of the forest's symphony. And the king encouraged him to add his own song as he explained his plan. The smith and the farmer, they gave me ideas. With the silver sparks from her anvil and the flight of the flies, if I can get the two to combine. Oh, humans are so clever. You, with your creative minds, tricky solutions to impossible riddles. If I weren't a master of enchantment, I'd say listening to this was enrapturing. You're most kind, my king. The king laughed, a bassy rumble that made its way through the Starcatcher's chest and surrounded his heart for all of a moment, before he was laughing too. Their short duet, the call for the symphony to travel to the table, the feast slowly beginning. Ah! I must take my place at the head. Sit with me again, Starcatcher. Tell me another story as I eat. With pleasure, the Starcatcher agreed, finding himself back in his silver chair at the head of the table and sharing another story with the king and his attendants. As he spoke, he realized that the king had not asked him to eat tonight and found himself all the more relaxed, letting the music wash over him. The story paused only for the greetings of new members of the court taking their place, the smith and the farmer among them. The night passed in a haze of music and near-overwhelming perfumes that had the Starcatcher seeing colours he'd never known existed and hearing things he thought he never would, secrets of the forest kingdom shared with the king and thus with him. When the moon finally reached its apex and the feast began to settle, the king rose to take his leave, indicating for the Starcatcher to follow him. You have proven yourself worthy, darling, so I had some of the workers create you a more permanent resting place inside my palanquin. You'll sleep undisturbed until you are ready to wake. Pulling aside the green vine curtain, the king ushered the Starcatcher inside, barely concealing his pride as he displayed the interior to the smaller being. And what an interior it was! Mirrors and shining crystals adorned each wall. The king made a barely veiled glance into one of them, fixing his tunic, and flowers filled every empty space. In the center, a great bed of deep green moss and heather stood, surrounded by silken veils that fluttered like the wings of butterflies. At its side, another bed stood, identical save for its size. Clearly, this was the bed intended for the Starcatcher. It's beautiful, my king, breathed the Starcatcher, running one hand through the soft bed. Not that I expected any less from you. Well, I hope it's as comfortable as mine. Now, sleep. You have more work to do, no? Quite right, my king. The Starcatcher let the moss catch his weary body, eyes already half closed as he turned to his king. Good night. Sleep well, my little Starcatcher. May peace and light find your dreams. True to the king's word, the Starcatcher woke again of his own accord. No songs, nor any light to rouse him early. When he finally let himself rise from the bed, the stillness of the palanquin was almost disturbing. A glance to the larger bed confirmed his suspicions. His king had already departed for the day on his kingly duties. As for his duties, a light that never fades, The Starcatcher wandered out of the palanquin into a clearing already bursting with work melodies. The sun was making its lazy way across the sky, already nearing its peak. Now that can't be so hard. As he considered his options, a small plume of smoke caught his attention from where the feasts were prepared. Now, fire. It had destroyed so much. The Starcatcher had seen it happen before. But if it created such tempting food too, surely such a tool could be used to light the sky? Confident in his plan, the Starcatcher took his jar of flies and silver sparks and started towards the fires. In his short journey, the sounds of crackling and the scrape of utensils across pots melted into a slow melody, the chef's love song to their craft. Chef, my compliments on the wonderful feasts, the Starcatcher started, voice half lost under the sound of bubbling elixirs and searing meats. Such a compliment from one who eats the scraps hardly fit for the creatures we farm. The chef looked up, hands working ceaselessly to slice golden fruits and create meal after meal at unnatural speed. And yet, I still find myself captured by them, chef. The Starcatcher raised one hand to his lips, the lingering taste of the berries he'd eaten the night before still staining them red. I'd gladly eat the finest, if it wouldn't leave me reliant on it. I have to go back to my own food one day. Tell me, Starcatcher, have you eaten your own food since you arrived here? A branch above the chef reached down, and a plain apple landed in their hand. They shined it on their shirt as the Starcatcher watched, then handed it to him. Fresh from the branches, no magic. Do have a taste. And how do I know this isn't a trick, chef? I only came here to ask for some fire. The Starcatcher held the apple, the temptation of a taste of home drawing it to his mouth. The king won't let us trick you, Starcatcher. Enjoy a taste of what your home tastes like compared to our scraps, and I'll give you all the fire you want. The hesitation in the Starcatcher's movements was clear, but for the light, and to satisfy his own curiosity. Very well. He handed his jar to the chef, who smiled and took a bite of the ruby-red apple. In a crashing wave of sourness, the apple began to rot against the Starcatcher's lips. Bitterness and decay consumed his senses as he choked down the small bite, eyes watering. Imagine how bad everything else tastes now, Starcatcher. Stop subjecting yourself to the scraps, thinking you're cleverer than our food is delicious. But I had hoped. Yes, and it was a wise hope for one so new to our kingdom. I believe even the king thought you had found a way out of that little trick of ours. But he's never tasted your food. It decays too fast here, you see. And sure enough, the apple was now nothing more than browning skin and a decaying core in his hands. With a yelp, he let it fall to the floor, aghast. Your fire, Starcatcher. I hope you find what you are looking for. The chef smiled, passing the jar back to the Starcatcher, who merely mumbled his gratitude, his song stilted as he made his way back to the palanquin. If he couldn't return to his world without starving, then he would at least light the sky for the others left there. Staring into the jar, he watched as the silver flies danced around the fire, heart leaping with joy. This could truly be what he was hoping for. With one careful hand, he reached in to baptize the first of the flies in the flame, only for its white heat to scorch his hand. The fire leapt up his arm as if alive and angry at its containment before escaping into the air in an almighty huff of smoke. The Starcatcher let out a despondent cry, watching as his hand began to redden and blister. Is that another celebration, I hear? The Starcatcher merely let out another cry as he tried to close the jar again, his burning hand searing with pain. From the curtain of the palanquin, light streamed in before it was blocked out by the great form of his king, who crossed the room in a matter of steps before sinking down into a graceful crouch by the distraught Starcatcher. Starcatcher, whatever is the matter? My king, I cannot find the light. The fire burnt my hand. I do not know what else to try, the Starcatcher lamented, cradling his own arm and hiding his head in his knees. Now, Starcatcher, breathe. You were due a failure after being so successful. Give me your hand. I will fix it. I already said you must stay well. With hiccuping, shallow breaths, the Starcatcher regained his composure and extended his hand to the king. This is a bad injury. It won't heal until at least your next rest, but I can usher it along. Please. The Starcatcher's song was hoarse and broken, but the king knew better than to reprimand that at the moment. Instead, he brought the Starcatcher's burn to his lips, pressing kisses along the length of it that soothed the flares of pain, bandaging it in soft leaves that appeared from the ether. Better? A little, yes. The Starcatcher looked up, taking a steadying breath and watching as his arm slowly began to mend. I cannot go home. Perplexed, the king nodded, plucking another flower from his Starcatcher's hair and watching as it bloomed and wilted in a slow, entrancing cycle. That was the agreement you decided upon when you gave me your help, Starcatcher. You would aid me until I put lights into the sky, and then you would return home. But the food, my king. The chef let me taste something from home today, and it was repulsive, even though I've only eaten scraps here. Were I to go home, I would not be able to eat. I'd starve. The Starcatcher explained, finality in his grey tune. Starcatcher, darling, we are not cruel here. We play tricks, but humans do that too, no? I'd wager that we keep our word better than humans anyway. I said you would return home, and so you shall. You will not starve, provided you return here to eat now and then. At the least. Nothing's as scary as you make it seem. I didn't think of it that way. Colour started to filter back into the Starcatcher's song, hue by hue. But what of the light? I couldn't find it today. Be at ease. You have my trust that you will use that ingenious human brain of yours to find something. Now you can hardly come to the feast tonight in your state. Will I bring you the finest to eat, now that you've quelled your senseless worries? My king, shan't the court miss your attendance? They'll cope. I'd rather keep an eye on my little Starcatcher for this evening. That magic I used can be volatile at times. You can entertain me this evening. Tell me another story. Perhaps we can duet, trade one story for another. The king smiled, sweeping a hand along the floor of the room to encourage up a table of oak branches and ivy, just small enough for the Starcatcher to sit comfortably at it, whilst the king sat at the other end, regal as ever, even in the company of only one. Tell me now, why dedicate yourself to the sky? You told me what you wanted, but why? The Starcatcher took a long breath, memories of home all but consuming him, altering his tune. Then, with a gentle smile, he began to tell his king another story. In a life before the nightly vigils, the Starcatcher had been fond of the forest. He would traverse its paths and note its patterns, the stories the trees told, and the names of each flower. But he was not alone in his endeavours. Once there was a village. Every day they would venture into the thicket together, map the lands they loved so. By night they would dance around fires and dream of love. Once there was anger. Anger turned that fire of celebration into a weapon. The village burned, and then, once, there were two left alive. The Starcatcher and his brother, the hunter. For years the two lived on in the darkness of their once village, until the hunter could stand it no longer. Unaccompanied and without light, he struck out once more into the forest, longing for a semblance of the life they'd had before anger had taken it all from them. And then he lost himself in the forest, finished the Starcatcher. I found him the next morning, mere footsteps from a familiar path that he wouldn't have been able to see by night. Dead. My, what a harrowing tale. Dear Starcatcher, I can hardly imagine what sorrow you felt. Unbearable sorrow, my king, such as no man should have to feel. And unending pain, the Starcatcher said, his song hollow. I can take away the suffering, Starcatcher, if it would help you. If you allow me, you can give me the suffering, and the memories. If you'll permit me, my king, I'd keep them. He would resent my forgetting, and I fear, without him, I would lose my own meaning. No one else should lose people like I have. Very well. Now, will you eat? In the course of the Starcatcher's story, their small table had been laden with all manner of foods by silent dancers who made their exit when the king waved a hand at them. Yes, I will. What would you recommend? The Starcatcher glanced at the piles of food, reaching out a hand to take a golden fruit, only to wince as the burn reminded him of its presence. Try this, and do rest that hand. My magic can only do so much at once. With a tenderness unknown to one of such power, the king lifted a small bushel of silver berries, plucking one and resting it against the Starcatcher's lips. My king, Starcatcher, how do you expect to eat with all this talking? I assure you it is not demeaning for me to take care of you. The Starcatcher managed a small laugh, then finally accepted the berry. The taste was unlike anything he'd eaten so far in the kingdom, so much more overwhelming than the scraps he'd been subsisting off of. Sweeter, richer, somehow brighter. And you must try these also. Even as the Starcatcher was recovering from the first taste, the king was bustling around the table, collecting samples of different cakes and fruits for him to enjoy. The rest of the evening passed in that fashion, the king and the Starcatcher enjoying each other's company and forgetting about the darkness in the sky until they found themselves to rest, their shared laughter a strange new duet that the kingdom had not enjoyed before. Time was slipping from the Starcatcher like sand now, but he reasoned, based on how well rested he felt, that he must have slept longer than usual that night. Nevertheless, when he woke, he was filled with a strange energy. From the moment he rose, seeing the small rays of sunlight filter into the palanquin, he had an idea. The most certain of lights, of course. How could he have been so blinded to the obvious answer? Letting the ecstasy of hope fuel his dance across the glade, the Starcatcher caught up his jar of silver wings in a perfectly healed hand and sang his way to where the sun shone brightest. Bathed in the sunlight, the Starcatcher opened up the jar, allowing the sun to pour in and fill it to bursting. Entranced by the light, the Starcatcher watched it wash over the silver wings, glinting and sparkling with potential. Once again, time melted away as the Starcatcher quietly celebrated his success. He could wait until night to show his king this success, since he'd be going home after the sky was bright. One more day in the glade couldn't hurt. One more feast with his king in the court. And so passed the day, staring into the sunlit jar, until finally the songs and smells of sunset reached him. Finally moving from his silent observation, he picked up the jar and danced his way through the final light of the day, towards the feast, still engrossed in the jar of sun. "My king!" the Starcatcher called out, his eyes never leaving the brightness of the jar. "I found it!" "The light? Come to me, Starcatcher dear. Show me your success." Stumbling slightly from tunnel vision, the Starcatcher found his way to his king, where he finally looked into his fond gaze and beamed, presenting the jar to him. "I captured the sunlight, my king, and, well, I've been gazing at it all day. It's beautiful, is it not?" A brief look of confusion crossed his king's infallible face, and he peered down at the jar with a pout. "It looks to be fading, darling. Whatever happened?" But to the Starcatcher, everything was still so bright. He looked away from the king, and the light from the jar seemed to follow his eyes, and, all of a sudden, it was like he was back on the edge of the world, watching the light lead him. I have to follow this, my king. I'm sure I'll find it." With hurried words, he took off after the fading light, feet hardly touching the ground in what felt like his final dance. He paid no mind to the direction he was traveling, frantic with the need to recapture the sunlight. The Starcatcher didn't even notice when the ground underfoot changed from soft grass to that of the wooden palanquin floor. A few more steps and surely the light would be in his grasp. An almighty crash echoed through the clearing, the splitting of the Starcatcher's heart, he was certain, and then his head finally cleared. Looking around, light now absent from his vision, he saw the path he'd left behind him. The curtain splitting off the king's chambers had fallen, and moonlight now streamed in, illuminating the room and revealing the source of the thunderous noise. He'd crashed into one of the mirrors that adorned the king's walls, and it had fallen to the floor. Thousands upon thousands of shards, each one glittering in the moonlight. Each one glittering in the moonlight. The Starcatcher, from where he had tumbled after his frenzied dash, reached out to the first shard, wincing at its sharp edges, how easily they drew blood, and held it up to the moon's light. Brightness shone through it, reflecting splintered patterns across the walls. Another, a second stab of pain, but the same result. The eternal light he'd been searching for. "Starcatcher, say you've not fled!" The king's song, desperate and worried, wavered through the clearing, a repeated verse that only grew louder as he reached the palanquin. He stepped in, still cradling the jar of silver wings, and his eyes fell on the figure of his Starcatcher, with the shards of the mirror in his bloody hands. "No, my king, I've not fled," confirmed the Starcatcher, holding up the shards. "In fact, the light did. It led me to the answer." The king moved nearer, and peering into the Starcatcher's hands, saw his face reflected 1,000 times over, stained in red and pure in white, and the moon beyond that. "Charming as always, and ingenious as well. Come, Starcatcher, it is time for me to deliver on my end of our deal." The king, all force and grace as ever, placed the shards into the jar, then held one hand out to his Starcatcher. The Starcatcher took it, breath shaking as he relished in the now familiar warmth of his king. The dance back through the glade was slow, muted. A gentle waltz between the king and Starcatcher that the court watched with hushed adoration and gentle smiles. A new age was upon them, they reasoned. An age of lights in the sky. With each careful step into the trees, the Starcatcher and the king found themselves higher and higher above the kingdom until they were perched in the branches of the tallest tree in the forest. An ocean of trees and wildflowers spread out beneath them, and above them, the endless expanse of the sky, a full moon at its highest point to welcome in the new sky. Now, darling Starcatcher, each silver wing will need a light. That is you, your task. Then I can send them up into the heavens. Then our deal is done, and you can return home. And the night sky will be brighter than ever before. It will be beautiful. The king poured out the ingredients of the new night sky into his lap, and, in silent agreement, the Starcatcher began to set shards of glass onto each pair of silver wings. The first impossible light was completed and passed to the king, who smiled, then pressed a kiss to it. A gentle glow suffused the new being, washing out everything the two could see, and then it took flight, becoming a stunning speck of light dancing around the moon. Then a second, a third, and a fourth, a 10th, a 100th, a 1,000th. With each being of light, the sky glowed anew, reds and yellows and purest white, and their ingredients soon ran dry. The last one, my king. It seems that way, doesn't it? What do we call them? I was thinking, stars. Such beauty deserves your name. The Starcatcher cradled the final star in his hands, as if loath to let the king kiss this one. That's not my real name, my king, he pointed out, his slow song longing. Ah, I'm well aware. Don't tell me it, else you cannot return home at all. The king plucked the star from the Starcatcher's hands, kissed it, and watched as it joined its brethren. Ageless as he was, as many wonders and miracles he'd witnessed and caused. I have to thank you now, I think, Starcatcher, darling. You've shown me something I've never seen before. Now, home with you, no? You have a sky to be watching. In the Starcatcher's chest, something released with the king's words, like a band of iron he'd never known was there. His heart began to race, and his mind was freer than it had been in years. All the trials, the vigils, the fires, suddenly he was free of them all, allowed his own desire. King, time works differently in this kingdom, does it not? He already knew the answer. The apple had proven the theory. It's somehow faster. And if it's faster, well, I already had next to nothing at home. If I were to return now, even that would be dust. Perhaps so. What is your point, dear Starcatcher? The king's hope was clear, and the Starcatcher was glad to meet it. Turning to the king of the forest, he bowed his head and took the fine hand, now pressing his own kiss to it, a return of those bestowed upon him and his quest. You've given me one name, dear king, but may I have yours also? Starlight, it would be my only pleasure. All anew under the blanket of stars, the two shared names, their duet perfectly in harmony, for the rest of time immemorial.